All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a pretty wild journey, all the way from a gluttonous medieval paradise to the supposedly quiet, sterile, ivory tower of 20th century literature. Now, I know, that sounds like a strange trip, but trust me, along the way, we're going to uncover how the simple act of telling a story can actually become a powerful and deeply political form of action. So, let's just dive right in.
Okay, so our story starts in this fantastical medieval place called the Land of Cockaigne. It's this vision of pure, effortless abundance. I mean, think about it. It's a world where the rivers literally flow with wine. The buildings have walls made of meat, and get this, fully cooked birds just fly right into your mouth. It's this fun, kind of satirical folk dream, a world completely turned upside down with no work, no hunger, no problems. And this silly, wonderful fantasy of a perfect place? Well, that's our first clue.
So from that wild folk dream, we take a step towards something a bit more formal, Thomas More's utopia, a word he made up back in 1516. And what's so brilliant is the wordplay he baked right into it. See, it's a pun on two different Greek words, autopia, which means no place, and utopia, which means good place. So from the very beginning, a utopia is both this impossible fiction and an ideal society. It's the perfect place that exists, well, nowhere.
But what if utopia isn't really a place at all? This is where our whole understanding gets a major upgrade. You see, a lot of modern thinkers started to argue that if we only focus on utopia as a destination, some perfect blueprint, we're kind of missing the entire point. The real power isn't in the place, it's in the process of thinking about it.
Okay, so this is the crucial shift right here. The old school view saw utopia as a product, like a finished blueprint for a perfect island. But the newer, more dynamic idea sees utopia as a practice. This is the huge leap from thinking of utopia as a noun to seeing it as a verb. The power isn't in the final destination, it's in the very act of imagining, of criticizing, of wanting something better in the first place.
And three key thinkers really drove this new understanding home. First, you have Ernst Bloch. He saw utopia as an expression of hope, but not just a passive feeling. No, for him, it was a directing act, a cognitive push that guides us toward doing something. Then, building on that, Arturo Roig came up with the idea of a utopian function in our language, the way we use stories to critique what's happening right now. And finally, Bill Ashcroft took it even further, arguing that for people who are oppressed, the process of imagining a different world is, by itself, a really profound act of resistance.
So, okay, if the act of imagining is a form of action, can literature actually be a political act, even when it seems to have nothing to do with politics? To put this idea to the test, we're going to look at a really fascinating case study, the literary project of two absolute giants of Argentine literature, Jorge Luis Borges and Adolfo Bioy Casares.
Now, let's be honest. The standard story you hear about Borges and Bioy, especially back in the 30s and 40s, is that they were the ultimate ivory tower writers, right? They were supposedly just obsessed with fantasy and philosophy, totally disconnected from all the political chaos of their time. But what if that whole story is just wrong?
To really get what they were doing, you have to look at the world they were in. The literary scene in Argentina at that time was completely dominated by this thing called nationalist realism, a movement that was obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with defining the one true, authentic Argentine being. So what did Borges and Bioy do? They made a very deliberate choice to go in the exact opposite direction. They embraced fantastic stories, creating a worldly, cosmopolitan literature that was talking to European modernism. This was not escapism, it was a counteroffer.
And this, right here, is the crucial point. By rejecting that dominant nationalist style, by choosing a totally different way to write, they weren't just making a choice about art. They were jumping right into a huge cultural and political debate about what Argentina was and what it could be. That aesthetic decision, that was, in and of itself, a political act. It was a rebellion.
Which brings us right back around to our big idea. What Borges and Bioy were up to is a perfect example of what you could call imagination as political praxis. So let's zoom in and break down what that really truly means.
The key word here is praxis. It's basically a term for the process of turning an idea or a theory into a real, concrete, embodied action. So when we apply that to literature, it means the writing itself, the act of creating a story, isn't something separate from action. It is a form of action. It has real-world potential.
So how does that even work? Well, first, literature causes a disruption. By showing us these worlds with totally different rules, fantastic stories create little cracks or fissures in our assumptions about what's real or normal. They start to shake up our certainty.
And once those little fissures open up, something new has a chance to grow. By showing us other ways of being, other kinds of logic, other worlds entirely, literature fundamentally redefines the landscape of what we, as a group, can even imagine. It literally expands the horizon of what's possible.
And here it is. This is the ultimate conclusion. The imagining isn't just a warm-up for the action. For thinkers like Ashcroft, and as we see with writers like Borges and Bioy, the imaginational work, the act of creating other worlds with stories, is the political work. That is the praxis.
So, wow. We've gone from the land of Cockagain all the way to the literary labs of Borges and Bioy, and we've watched the idea of utopia itself transform from a simple place into a powerful practice. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
It's really this. Literature isn't just a mirror reflecting the world, and it's not just an escape from it either. The stories we tell are the actual tools we use to understand, to critique, and ultimately, to build our reality. That utopian impulse, that deep desire for a better world, is put into action every single time a writer dares to imagine a different one. Which of course leaves us with one last question for you. Think about the books, the movies, the stories that you absolutely love. They aren't just entertainment. They're part of this very same process. So you have to ask yourself, what worlds are those stories trying to build? And what kind of fissures are they trying to open up in yours? Thanks for watching.